The sun dipped below the manicured horizon of Oakwood Estates, painting the perfectly trimmed lawns in hues of orange and purple. Life here was, ostensibly, idyllic. Children played in the cul-de-sac, riding bikes and chasing errant soccer balls. Barbecues filled the air with the tantalizing aroma of charcoal and grilled meat. We, my wife Sarah and I, thought we'd found our little slice of suburban heaven when we moved in 3 years ago. Recently, I decided to add a small shed to the back of our property. I envisioned it as a haven for my gardening tools and a place to tinker with small projects. Nothing fancy, just a simple structure to keep things organized. I spent weeks meticulously planning, obtaining the necessary permits, or so I thought, and finally, building it myself. The shed, a testament to my weekend warrior skills, stood proudly in our backyard. However, beneath the veneer of tranquility, a storm was brewing. It was a storm named Carol, or as she was more commonly known in Oakwood Estates, HOA Karen. And our shed, it seemed, was about to become her latest target. We hadn't anticipated the level of scrutiny, the petty rules, and the sheer audacity that was about to be unleashed upon us. Little did we know, our quiet suburban life was about to be turned upside down, all thanks to a shed and an overzealous HOA president. The first salvo in this suburban war arrived in the form of an official-looking envelope, crisp and white, bearing the ominous Oakwood Estates Homeowners Association logo. I remember thinking it was probably just another reminder about upcoming landscaping guidelines. I was so wrong. Inside, a single sheet of paper outlined a litany of supposed violations concerning my newly erected shed. The listed infractions read like something out of a Kafka novel. Apparently, the shed was non-compliant in 3 distinct ways. First, its dimensions exceeded the maximum allowable square footage by a mere 12 inches. Second, the color, a shade of tasteful beige I had carefully selected, was not on the HOA's pre-approved color palette. And finally, its placement, while perfectly aligned with property lines, was deemed to be in violation of setback regulations. Each infraction was meticulously detailed, citing specific articles and sub-paragraphs from the HOA's voluminous rulebook. The letter concluded with a stern warning: rectify the violations within 14 days, or face escalating fines and further action. I scoffed, thinking this was some kind of bureaucratic overreach. Surely, a simple conversation would clear things up. Little did I know, I was dealing with an opponent who thrived on conflict, an opponent who saw the HOA rules not as guidelines, but as weapons. Armed with what I believed was common sense and a neighborly spirit, I embarked on a quest to resolve this shed situation amicably. First, I drafted a polite email to the HOA, outlining my understanding of the regulations and politely pointing out the discrepancies in their interpretation. I even included photos of the shed, highlighting its aesthetic appeal and minimal impact on the neighborhood. Days turned into a week, and the email remained unanswered. Next, I tried calling the HOA office. After navigating a labyrinthine phone menu, I finally reached someone who identified herself as Carol's assistant. She informed me that Carol was very busy and would respond to my email when she had time. Undeterred, I decided to attend the next HOA meeting, hoping to plead my case in person. The meeting was held in a sterile community room, filled with stern-faced residents and an air of bureaucratic formality. When I finally got a chance to speak, Carol, perched at the head of the table, listened with a dismissive smirk. She brushed aside my arguments, citing the unambiguous language of the HOA rules and declaring the matter closed. It was becoming increasingly clear that reason and compromise were not part of Carol's vocabulary. This wasn't about rules, it was personal. That's when the fines started rolling in. Initially, they were small, almost negligible, like a mosquito bite. $50 here, $100 there, each one accompanied by a curtly worded letter reiterating the shed's non-compliance. But they quickly escalated. It felt like Carol was personally inventing new violations just to punish us. Suddenly, we were being fined for having excessive lawn decorations, 2 ceramic gnomes, for leaving our trash cans out longer than necessary, a whole extra hour, and even for the color of our welcome mat. Apparently, it clashed with the neighborhood's aesthetic harmony. The letters became increasingly hostile, laced with passive-aggressive remarks and thinly veiled threats. Carol seemed to relish her power, taking every opportunity to make our lives miserable. She'd drive by our house multiple times a day, scrutinizing our property with a hawk-like gaze. We even caught her snapping photos of our lawn with her phone. It was clear that this was no longer about the shed. It was about control. It was about Carol establishing her dominance, and we were her unfortunate target. The idyllic suburban dream was rapidly turning into a living nightmare. I'll never forget that Tuesday morning. I was working from home, the gentle hum of my computer filling the otherwise quiet house. Suddenly, a jarring rumble broke the silence. I peered out the window, and what I saw sent a jolt of pure disbelief through my body. A bulldozer, a massive, yellow behemoth, was lumbering across our lawn, heading straight for the shed. My heart pounded in my chest as I raced outside, yelling at the top of my lungs. "Stop! What are you doing?" The driver, a burly man with a blank expression, simply shrugged and pointed towards Carol, who stood on the sidewalk, arms crossed, a smug look plastered across her face. "You failed to comply," she announced, her voice dripping with self-righteousness. "The HOA has authorized the removal of the non-compliant structure." I watched in stunned silence as the bulldozer tore into my shed, splintering wood and crushing metal. It was a surreal, nightmarish scene. All the hours I had spent building it, the pride I had taken in my handiwork, were being reduced to rubble in a matter of minutes. The feeling was a mix of anger, disbelief, and a profound sense of violation. This wasn't just about a shed, it was about Carol's unchecked power, her blatant disregard for decency, and her utter contempt for us. As the last pieces of the shed crumbled, leaving a pile of debris in its wake, the bulldozer fell silent. Carol, still smirking, approached me, seemingly basking in her victory. "Consider this a lesson," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "You can't just ignore the rules." I stood there, speechless, the adrenaline slowly receding, replaced by a cold, simmering rage. I looked at the wreckage, then back at Carol, and a thought, a desperate, almost comical thought, popped into my head. "You know," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "you might want to know who my wife is before you go around bulldozing our property." Carol raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. "Oh, and who is she?" "The Queen of England." I took a deep breath. "She's a federal judge." The smirk vanished from Carol's face. Her eyes widened, a flicker of uncertainty replacing the smugness. She clearly didn't believe me. A judge," she stammered. "That's right," I replied, finally feeling a glimmer of satisfaction. "Judge Sarah Miller. Maybe you've heard of her." The blood drained from Carol's face. The realization of what she had done, of the potential consequences, began to dawn on her. The bulldozer incident had just taken a very interesting turn. That evening, I recounted the entire saga to Sarah, from the initial HOA notice to the earth-shattering climax with the bulldozer. She listened patiently, her expression growing increasingly grim with each detail. Sarah is a remarkably even-tempered person, a trait that serves her well in the courtroom. But I could see a flicker of anger in her eyes as I described Carol's escalating harassment and the wanton destruction of my shed. "I can't believe she actually did that," Sarah said, shaking her head. "I've always tried to stay out of your HOA squabbles, honey. I didn't want my position to influence anything. But this is beyond the pale." She explained that she deliberately avoided intervening, wanting me to handle it myself and believing in the importance of maintaining a separation between her professional life and our personal affairs. However, the demolition of the shed crossed a line. It wasn't just about a shed anymore, it was about abuse of power, blatant disregard for the law, and a personal vendetta carried out with shocking impunity. "This isn't just about our shed anymore," she stated firmly. This is about holding her accountable. It was time for the judge to step into the arena. The news of Sarah's profession rippled through the Oakwood Estates HOA board like a seismic wave. Panic ensued. Emergency meetings were called, voices were raised, and fingers were pointed. The board members, previously united in their unwavering support of Carol, suddenly found themselves scrambling for cover. They had blindly trusted her, assuming her actions were justified, never questioning the legality or ethical implications of her relentless pursuit of the shed. Now, staring down the barrel of a potential lawsuit from a federal judge, their carefully constructed world of suburban control began to crumble. They frantically sought legal counsel, hoping to mitigate the damage and somehow distance themselves from Carol's actions. Emails flew back and forth, filled with frantic apologies, desperate pleas for understanding, and thinly veiled accusations against Carol for acting unilaterally. The atmosphere within the HOA shifted from one of smug self-importance to one of abject fear. They had awakened a sleeping giant, and they knew they were woefully unprepared for the consequences. The carefully manicured lawns of Oakwood Estates suddenly felt like a battlefield. As Sarah and her legal team delved into the HOA's records, they unearthed a treasure trove of questionable practices. It turned out that Carol's reign of terror extended far beyond our shed. They discovered numerous instances of selective enforcement, where certain residents were given preferential treatment while others were subjected to draconian rules. They found evidence of financial mismanagement, with HOA funds being used for questionable expenses and personal gain. They uncovered a pattern of intimidation and harassment, with Carol using her position to bully and silence anyone who dared to challenge her authority. The deeper they dug, the more dirt they found. It became clear that Carol's actions were not isolated incidents but rather symptoms of a systemic problem within the HOA. The organization had become a vehicle for Carol's personal vendettas and a tool for maintaining her iron grip on the community. What started as a simple shed dispute was now evolving into a full-blown investigation, exposing the dark underbelly of Oakwood Estates and revealing the extent of Carol's abuse of power. The meticulously crafted facade of suburban perfection was about to crumble, revealing the rot beneath. Armed with a mountain of evidence, Sarah decided to take decisive action. She filed a lawsuit against the HOA, not just for the destruction of the shed, but for a comprehensive overhaul of their practices. The lawsuit alleged abuse of power, selective enforcement of rules, financial mismanagement, and a pattern of harassment and intimidation. It sought not only monetary damages for the destroyed shed and the emotional distress caused by Carol's actions, but also a court order mandating transparency, accountability, and fair treatment for all residents of Oakwood Estates. The lawsuit was a shot across the bow, a declaration that Carol's reign of terror was over. It was a bold move, one that could have far-reaching consequences for HOAs across the country. It was also deeply personal for Sarah. While she had initially hesitated to use her position as a judge, she now felt a moral obligation to protect her community from the kind of unchecked power that Carol represented. This wasn't just about a shed, it was about justice, fairness, and the right to live in a community free from harassment and abuse. The lawsuit ignited a media firestorm. Local news outlets picked up the story, followed by regional and then national publications. The narrative of HOA Karen versus the federal judge resonated with a public weary of HOA overreach and petty bureaucratic tyranny. We were inundated with interview requests, our story becoming a symbol of the little guy fighting against a powerful and often unreasonable system. The internet exploded with outrage. Social media platforms were flooded with comments condemning Carol's actions and praising Sarah's courage. The hashtag #ShedJustice trended worldwide. The story tapped into a deep vein of resentment against HOAs and their often arbitrary rules. People shared their own horror stories of HOA disputes, highlighting the need for greater regulation and accountability. The lawsuit transformed from a local dispute into a national conversation, shining a spotlight on the often unseen power dynamics within suburban communities. The David versus Goliath narrative fueled the public's imagination, turning our personal struggle into a cause célèbre. The intense media scrutiny and public condemnation took a heavy toll on Carol. She became a pariah in Oakwood Estates, ostracized by neighbors who had once admired her authority. The constant media attention made it impossible for her to go anywhere without being recognized and subjected to glares and whispers. Her reputation, once meticulously crafted, was now in tatters. Beyond the social shaming, Carol also faced potential legal repercussions. The evidence of financial mismanagement and abuse of power unearthed during the discovery phase opened her up to criminal charges. The HOA, desperate to distance itself from her actions, cooperated fully with the investigation, providing even more damning information. Carol, once the queen of Oakwood Estates, was now facing a very real possibility of jail time. Her carefully constructed world had crumbled around her, leaving her isolated, humiliated, and facing the consequences of her actions. The taste of power had turned bitter, leaving a lingering aftertaste of regret and despair. The downfall of HOA Karen was complete. Faced with mounting legal pressure and overwhelming public opinion, the HOA eventually caved. They agreed to a settlement that included a full apology for Carol's actions, reimbursement for the destroyed shed, and a commitment to sweeping reforms within the organization. The settlement mandated regular audits of HOA finances, transparent decision-making processes, and a clear set of guidelines for rule enforcement. It also included a provision that prohibited Carol from ever holding a position of authority within the HOA again. As part of the settlement, the HOA also agreed to allow me to build a new shed, this time fully compliant with all regulations, down to the precise shade of beige. While the new shed was a welcome addition, the real victory was the systemic changes that were implemented within the HOA. The settlement ensured that no other resident would have to endure the kind of harassment and abuse that we had experienced. Justice had been served, and the community of Oakwood Estates was finally on the path to becoming a more fair and equitable place to live. The Oakwood Estates saga became a cautionary tale for HOAs nationwide. The story served as a stark reminder that unchecked power, selective enforcement, and personal vendettas have no place in community governance. It prompted many HOAs to reevaluate their rules, procedures, and overall approach to community management. Some HOAs implemented new training programs for board members, focusing on ethics, fairness, and conflict resolution. Others revised their governing documents to ensure greater transparency and accountability. State legislatures also took notice, with several states introducing new laws to regulate HOA practices and protect homeowners from abuse. The Shed Justice movement had sparked a national conversation about HOA reform, leading to tangible changes in laws and regulations. While our experience was undoubtedly stressful and disruptive, it ultimately served as a catalyst for positive change, empowering homeowners and holding HOAs accountable for their actions. The bulldozed shed had become a symbol of resistance, a testament to the power of ordinary people to stand up against injustice and fight for their rights. Looking back on the entire experience, Sarah and I often reflect on the lessons we learned about community, power, and justice. We discovered the importance of standing up for what's right, even when faced with seemingly insurmountable odds. We learned that even the most idyllic communities can harbor hidden injustices, and that it takes courage and determination to expose them. More importantly, our experience strengthened our bond as a couple. We faced adversity together, supporting each other through the emotional turmoil and legal battles. Sarah's unwavering commitment to justice and her willingness to fight for what she believed in inspired me, and I, in turn, provided her with the emotional support she needed to navigate the intense media scrutiny and the pressures of the legal proceedings. The shed, though initially a source of conflict, ultimately became a symbol of our resilience and our unwavering commitment to each other. It represented our ability to overcome adversity and to emerge stronger and more united than before. And while we may never look at our HOA quite the same way again, we are grateful for the experience, as it taught us valuable lessons about the importance of community, the abuse of power, and the enduring strength of love and justice. And so, the story of the shed, the HOA Karen, and the federal judge comes to a close. Oakwood Estates is a quieter place now, a little less perfect, perhaps, but undeniably more just. The new shed stands proudly in our backyard, a testament to our resilience and a reminder of the importance of fighting for what's right. Carol, I hear, moved away, seeking a community where her particular brand of control might be more appreciated. I doubt she found it. The internet, after all, remembers everything. As for Sarah, she continues to serve as a federal judge, dispensing justice with wisdom and compassion. And well, I finally have a place to store my gardening tools. More importantly, I have a deeper appreciation for the strength and courage of my wife, and a renewed commitment to standing up against injustice, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant it may seem. The bulldozed shed may be gone, but its legacy lives on, a reminder that even in the most ordinary of suburban communities, extraordinary things can happen when people are willing to fight for what's right. The end.